So
We need to
Norma,
go.
we welcome you to our sort of abbreviated chair meeting because of the mistake I made today with the daylight savings time in Israel. That's what happened, Yagev. You all changed the other day to daylight savings time. I was not aware of that. So we're going to record this and we'll send it around to everybody else. But I think we can have a really wonderful discussion with Norma. So we are delighted to have her as our guest today. And Yagev, would you tell Norma a little bit about your background and then we'll learn about Norma's background?
Sure, absolutely. I'm very happy to meet you. I was born in Israel. I was actually spent part of my childhood and adulthood in South America. I lived in Ecuador 5 years and in Brazil for 3 years. And then I went to the military like everybody that does around here. And then I studied the economics and psychology. My first job was in the Israeli Navy. I was responsible for organizational development in the Israeli Navy. Did that for a few years. Then I joined the consulting company based in California, which is called the Adizes Institute, that was founded by Dr. Ichak Adizes. And I did a lot of transformational work for companies in Israel and in Europe. Did that for a few years. Then I relocated to the US and managed the office of this US office of this company. And went back to Israel, started my own consulting company, did a lot of change management and strategy implementation, a lot of post-merger integration work. And then one of my clients offered me a job that I could not refuse. So I went to work for a global chemicals company based in Tel Aviv. Did that for 6 years and concluded that just before the Corona pandemic, so which was not such a great time to go back to consulting, but that's what I did in early 2020. So that's a bit about me.
And Norma,
Wow.
please tell Yagev, where are you originally from?
So, Yagev, I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. And the most wonderful thing that happened to me in Baltimore, because I was only there until I was 17, it relates to what's happening today with anti-racism initiatives. In 1958, I lived in a neighborhood called Ashburton, and if you go to movies by Barry Levinson, he was in my class. He was the king of the senior prom. He made movies about Baltimore in the 1950s, and it was pretty segregated, but there were some progressives. And in 1958, the first Negroes moved into our neighborhood, and my parents and the other neighbors got together to integrate the neighborhood. And they invited the new neighbors into their homes, and they said, don't run, because this was happening all over the country. The realtors were the blockbusters, and they were getting people to panic and run and leave the neighborhood, and neighborhoods would shift almost overnight from white to black. So my neighbors and their parents got together in people's living rooms, and they said, don't, the new neighbors said to the white people, don't run. We want the same things you do. We want safe neighborhoods. We want good schools for our kids. So we want the same things you do. So don't run. And wherever you run, we're going to follow you anyway. So don't run. And it worked. And Ashburton became integrated. And I was 17. And I was a witness to this. My parents didn't talk about it. They were just part of this progressive movement. And that is my story. It stuck with me forever. I can't bear to watch what's going on today, that not much has happened.
So what took you to New York, where you are now, Norma?
Well, my husband Joe and I met at Temple University in Philadelphia in the 1960s. And we were there for 11 years. And we came to New York for him to do a postdoc in cancer research. He hated cancer research, but we fell in love with New York City. And everything changed with New York. Our careers took off in much different ways. He became a savior of old buildings in New York, historic preservation. And I went into the corporate world from the public sector. I was at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is international, for 20 years. And I said to myself, while I was there and working with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, doing what you're doing, strategy and change management and implementation. And I said to myself, this is really intellectually stimulating, but I want the emotional rewards. And I thought that they would come from working with mid-sized to small to mid-sized company CEOs. And that's exactly what I got, becoming a Vistage chair 22 years ago this month. And
22 years, wow.
22 years ago. So I've got not only the intellectual part, but the emotional part is so strong. I still have my 22-year founding member of my CEO group. He started it with me then.
Norma,
So you
what
have
made you?
a group that's,
Go ahead.
sorry, Buzz, if I can just interrupt and ask a
Yeah.
question. You have a group that's going on for 22 years now?
Well, this is an important question because it's 22 years for the group, but it's different people now than 22 years ago. Even though I have Peter Friedfeld, my founding member, the others have changed over time. And I used to get unbelievably sad when a member would leave. They stay on average 4 to 7 years in my experience. But I came up with the concept of emotional footprint. And just like in a family, when the grandparents and the parents pass on, it's not like they never were there. They leave an emotional footprint on the family and it keeps on growing. So today I say to new people when they join and they meet Peter, that we have the emotional footprints of all the members that came before you. And that's how our group came to function, with all of those patterns and members that were there that told stories and how we helped them, make progress in their companies and with themselves. It's all part of us.
Mm-hmm.
So how many groups do you have now, Norma?
Well,
You have
I had 3 until a couple months ago. During the pandemic, there's been some losses of people. What I did was I had 2 key executive groups. That's the CFOs, the COOs, the C-suite executives right underneath the CEO. I had 2 groups for years. And as one of those groups got smaller during the pandemic, I combined the 2 to make one super group of 17 people. It was 19, but 2 of them, the people's lives changed during the pandemic, and not everybody, is doing the same thing. So I have that super key group. I think is the best key group in the whole country. Key groups are wonderful. And then I have my CEO group. Right now it's 8 people. It's going to get large again, but at one time it was 16. That's the journey of a Vistage chair: up, down, down, up.
Can I ask a question, Buzz?
Yeah, anytime, please.
How is the key group different from your perspective from the CEO group? I mean, I understand it's people in different phases of their career, but from the point of view of you as a chair, how do they differ? Okay,
so I treat them the same. They are different in that they're not the chief of the business or the not-for-profit. I have not-for-profit members. I have family businesses. Mm-hmm. So they're not, sometimes they are owners, they're part owners. And in that key group, I even have some CEOs of smaller companies, like 2, 3, 4 million in revenue. And they prefer the key model. It's half the price. Mm-hmm. They prefer it to the CEO, but I treat them the same because they're, as far as they get even more done than the CEOs. The key executives, they just get down to work and they're very serious about it. On paper, there's a difference, but in actuality, I get just as much done with the key people. And during the pandemic, I've treated them exactly the same, even though the program here in the US the key program doesn't come with one-to-ones, but I give it to them anyway. I'm helping people in extraordinary ways to just get through this. But so the chief executives are from they're 5 million in revenue and up, and I've had people in that group up to $1 billion, but generally it's 5 million to a couple $100 million in revenue. And they're dealing with ownership issues, and sometimes it's a family business. They're dealing with so I've had public companies, so sometimes there's shareholder and board issues. So the issues tend to be at a little higher level, But the key grouping is very significant issues. It's not chopped liver, as we say in a joke in the US. They're not chopped liver. They're the real deal.
Mhm. Got it. Thank
And
you.
Norma, what is your greatest satisfaction in being a chair? What do you find is rewarding?
Well, I would say it's even more rewarding now than ever because we've, as we do very deep work with people and we see them, you can feel it happening when they're changing. You're sitting around the table and they're talking about what they think is an unsolvable opportunity or problem. They don't know how to go about it. And we ask a lot of questions and we get very deep. It's not just intellectual questions. It's, well, why are you afraid of that challenge? What does that remind you of? It's very deep work. And when what we're looking for is the key to turn that will open up something new for the person, something that has kept them from crossing a boundary or conquering a hurdle that they never thought they could do. We'll ask a lot of really good questions like, well, if you could do that, what would that look like? How would that make your business change? How would that change your life? And what's the biggest barrier to doing that? We go very deep, and then we ask the person to, well, what do you think your choices are? What commitment do you want to make to the group? And we're very serious about it. So over some years, I've seen people, quintuple their revenues or way increase their profits, reduce the company size, but increase their profits. So we get them to think differently just by jiggering them and having people around the table that come from all kinds of orientations and industries. That's a key point because they're from different industries. They haven't heard these kind of questions or these kind of possible alternatives before. They're hearing from people in other industries that are very provocative. They suggest something that they never thought of.
Norma, in your experience, what percentage of the topics that come up are business related versus personal or family or?
It's really hard to separate. I'll give you an example, and we're talking about opportunities even more than issues. So sometimes it's just turning it upside down, and it's an opportunity and not an issue. So one of my first members was a guy named Peter, and I took a chance on him because he was under the 5 million revenue mark that Vistage gives us for joining. And but he was 50 years old, and I saw a lot of fire in the belly in him. He was very, very energetic. And so I took a chance on him and he came into the group. And sure enough, a year after, his company was about only 2.5 million in revenue, and it was almost all public relations services and a little bit of association management. We call, like trade associations, association. He takes over all the management for them for a fee. So he had a little bit of association management and mostly PR, public relations. So sure enough, I saw this promise in him, and he a year and a half into his membership, he brings this opportunity to acquire a much larger company in Atlanta that was doing all association management. So Peter was 2.5 million, and this other company was, I don't know, 8 or 10, 12 million. I don't remember exactly. So I always have people around the table that are way different from each other. And I always have some not-for-profit members because they think differently. Mm-hmm. They're a little more mission-oriented and about the people and so on. So I had Ruth Abram, who founded the Tenement Museum in New York. It's a wonderful place where people go to see what their immigrant families, how they lived in the 1940s. They have apartments set up like the past. Anyway, so Ruth was sitting there at the table, and that day, I always have some financial geniuses in the group because that's not me and we need them. The financial geniuses pounced on Peter's opportunity. And somebody got up to the whiteboard and projected financial, revenues projected 5 years out and so on. This went on. It had to happen. They had to do it. They were like doing due diligence of Peter's company. What would it be like to acquire? And so 45 minutes into this number crunching and due diligence stuff, Ruth, who hadn't said a thing, she had been taking some notes in her little black book. There was a 10-second silence, which is unusual in a Vistage meeting. And she jumps into it and she goes, Peter, she said, you told us 2 months ago, because we meet once a month. You told us 2 months ago that you want to spend more time with your family. You want to coach your daughter's soccer team. You want to travel with your teenage son, Travis, and your little one, you want to spend more time helping her with her schoolwork. So how is it that going to Atlanta, where this other company was, how is it that going to Atlanta 3 days a week, which is what he would have to do to make it work, is going to jive with all that, your personal goals?
Right.
And only Ruth remembered all that. And she was jiggering him, asking him. So there was this dead silence around the table because everybody's going, why didn't I think of that? Just Ruth, the not-for-profit, she thinks of the person. So the upshot of all that was he did acquire the Kellen Company in Atlanta. But we helped him groom his number 2 person to go to Atlanta 3 days a week and manage all that. And I'm still in touch with Peter. That was like 20 years ago. I talked to him recently. He was on the way to Florida to retire. And his son, Travis, who I've also kept in touch with, who was a teenager then, and he's been running the Washington office of the Kellen Company. It's now about 50 million in revenues. And Travis is going to be the next CEO of the company. So this little peanut bought a bigger company, and Peter figured out how to save his personal life too, with the help of the group. So you cannot separate the two. There's people around the table that are watching out for both. We share our business and personal goals. I give that example when I'm recruiting people.
Great example.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Norman, in Israel, there's a different mentality. Agev can speak to this. Everybody serves in the military, boys and girls right out of high school. People know each other from the military. It's a very closed circuit with 8.5 million people. And a lot of people feel like, why should I pay? And in Israel, by the way, it's going to be $1,000 to join and $1,000 a month, for membership for the CE groups. Why should I pay $1,000? Well, I could get advice from a friend or a neighbor from the army. What would you say if get people like that over there?
Okay. I don't know if I can do this smoothly, but I think it would be really worth it if I could show you both just one page of what they've talked about in my group and how much money they got from how much revenue, what the revenue impact was. Can I show you that? Let me see if I can do this right. If not, you can edit this.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, Norman.
Yeah, let's see. Here we go. Okay. Can you both see my screen?
Yeah, you
Good.
can, sure.
Okay, all right, hold on. All right, I want you to really take this in. This is what I show people. These are actual issues that have come up in my meetings over the 22 years.
Okay, we don't see anything yet.
Oh, you don't see it? All right, wait a minute.
Yeah, we see a blank screen.
Yeah, a white screen.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll just, I will say a couple of these to you. So for example, how to find and hire the right people for key fundraising positions. That would have been in a not-for-profit. That was worth $2 million a year. How to get better performance and accountability from certain employees, $2 million a year. Here's once in a while you get a personal issue that is a huge impact. How to face business and personal fallout from a divorce and child custody issue. That was priceless. That's what the members say they got from it. how to get buy-in from a leader resisting necessary improvements in the organization, 1 million. I can send you this, Yagev, and Boaz, I can send it to you. Let me come back and stop the
Yeah,
share.
that'd be great.
So
That
what
would
we
be
do
wonderful.
is whenever we're working on an issue, we always ask the member, what do you estimate before the member commits to doing something? If you could do this, what do you estimate it's going to be worth to you and the company? And the answers are almost always in the millions annually. So when I talk to a candidate, I never tell them about the fees until I've shown them this one page. I say something like this, you know, people wonder what this is, like, is a secret society? I mean, what are we doing at these meetings? So I'm going to show you the kinds of topics that we actually talk about and that I've trained them to, you know, really spend time going deep on. You may spend an hour or an hour and a half on each one of those. And I show them that. And then on the right, there's the issue. And then to the right of that issue is the millions in revenue impact that the member himself or herself estimated that they got from implementing the ideas talked about in the group. And that's why I never get pushback on the dues. If I said the dues first, in the US, it's what, 18,000 a year for the CEO group.
Mm-hmm.
What? You know, they would go bananas. I wouldn't, you know, what do you spend that on a membership for? But they have no idea what that means. So I made up that list years ago, and I keep on adding to it topics that have been actually processed and what people told that they realized. So I never get pushback. I hear chairs all the time talking about people who didn't join. They have to prove why it's worth it. It's too blah, blah, blah. I never get that.
I think that's priceless, don't you, Yagev? I think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I wanted to add to your question was, I think that another characteristic of Israeli CEOs is their level of arrogance, which I would say is a bit higher than what you would see in US CEOs. They tend to be a bit arrogant.
Well, we have a dose of that too.
How do you convince somebody who thinks they know it all to join a group where it's actually, you know, you have to be vulnerable, you have to talk about your weaknesses, you have to talk about what's not working so great in your life?
Well, I'm going to give you maybe an unexpected answer. I don't take everybody, and if somebody's really impossible, I don't need them, and the group doesn't need them. If they're willing to be open, you know, it's kind of like a test. I spend 2 times with the person before I even introduce the person to some members. Once is just to hello and, you know, what we do and superficial. And then I say, okay, so I want to give you some of the experience. Let's book a one-to-one and actually work on something important to you. If they don't do that with me, then there's no point in going further. But you know, I want to that when the one-to-ones are part of the experience, let's do one together and see how it feels. And we'll talk about something important, and that either clinches it or it shows me that the person's not right for this. So it's not for everybody. It's for people that want to change. And
yeah, that sounds like a very good suggestion, because you're giving them kind of a mini experience of what they will later on have in the group itself. So.
Right, and then I have them meet one-on-one. Now we're doing it by Zoom, but in ordinary times it's in person with a couple of the members. And I'm not at that meeting. They just talk. So you can't do that when you're just starting, but you can simulate something. The last step, I tell the person, when we're both 95% sure that this is going to work for you, you'll come to a meeting, you'll sign the confidentiality part of the membership agreement. And I'll tell them that 99% of the time this works. At the end of the meeting, you'll tell me, let's go ahead. And we'll seal the deal with but that's what I do. I say, when we're both 95% sure, we'll have you come to a meeting and hear the confidential issues.
Right.
So Norma, Yagev will be going through Chair Academy at the end of April and the first couple of days in May. If you were him and you were starting a brand new group, no members present, coming out of Academy in Israel, what would be the first steps you would take to start the funnel of attracting potential members?
Okay,
How
so
would you proceed?
yeah, I've had many big learnings about this over the year. So I'm going to tell you what doesn't work for me. It does work for some chairs, but I'll tell you, I just will never do this again. What doesn't work for me is a blasted social media campaign, like LinkedIn to people you never know, you haven't met before, and just gunshot emails. And like some people say 5, 12, that has never worked for me. Some chairs swear by it. So I don't know how it would be in Israel, but I just don't do that because it's a very draining waste of time for me.
Mm-hmm.
So but I do use LinkedIn in a different way. If I go here in the US, Vistage has put together a list of about 16,000 CEOs and companies that they've sort of vetted. They have an approximate of the revenue, so you know if you're dealing with companies over 5 million or not. So I have gone to that list, picked out some people, and I have somebody helping me. And we research that person and they see who that person is connected to that I'm connected to.
Mm.
And I ask my connection to contact that person and introduce me. So that's the way the lists work for me. The only way they've ever worked for me. And then the thing that works even better for me is just when a member of the group tells somebody, you have to meet Norma. You just have to meet Norma. I can't even describe to you what's going to come from it because it's totally changed my life and my business. I have an alum of the group who's been doing that while he was in the group for 5 years, and after he left the group, he sold his big construction company for $1 bazillion, thanks to us. And he tells everybody, I wish I had 10 of Dan. And I can send you my 1-minute video. Dan is in it. That's another thing. We have a filmmaker in our lives, Joe and I, and he's a videographer, and he made a 1-minute video that's part of my signature. And people just click on that. I say, just click below, you'll learn something about me. And it's captured something about me that causes people to want to talk with me.
Great. So I would guess that substantial part of people who eventually join are through the existing members, right? So it's somebody like Dan going around and saying you have to try this out, you have to meet Norma, you have to join the group, and that's what really convinces them much more than anything.
And if it's not the existing members, then it's somebody that I know that knows somebody that I want to meet.
Right.
It's a personal connection, personal recommendation. Listen, you got to meet Norma. I've known her for 10 years, and they don't have to be in my group, but she's really been helping people to achieve their goals.
Mm-hmm.
So Norma, for Yagev, it could be somebody who's known him for many years, who may not be a candidate to be a member, but might introduce him to somebody else. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. The key is the personal introduction.
Mm-hmm.
I think new chairs can get candidates, I should say, could get very frustrated if the connections don't work and they spend a ton of time doing that. I think the most important thing is to use the social media to connect to somebody who can lead you to somebody.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. And the thing about Israel, as Yagev said, is the know-it-all attitude. And we're not looking for companies that are just beginning. I think that's an important point too, concerning the fee. Am I right, Norma? We're looking for companies that are doing at least 5 million a year in business.
Right, and people that have the temperament and the interest. It's not everybody. I call it editing. I edit out people that I know are going to be very high maintenance for me, and I don't want and for the group. I've learned over the years how to screen people.
Mm-hmm.
And Norma, once Yagev has 1 or 2 members, isn't it a good idea then for the three of them to literally work together to expand the group to find out what those people need as far as other members?
It's a great idea, Boaz. They're not always good at that. It's something that I wish I could do better. It's hard to get them to do that. So I needed some other ways too.
Mhm.
But it is a
But that's
great
one
way.
way.
One way.
Yeah. And also what I was going to help with our chairs in Israel is once they have a potential candidate, that maybe they get them on a Zoom call with me, because I've had 18 years of experience with Vistage. Do you think that's a good idea, Norma?
Sure. And I think the most powerful thing is to give them examples of, collect a couple of people that have doubled, tripled, quadrupled their revenues. That's what makes the dues seem just, you can disregard them.
Yeah, so Norma, we'd appreciate very much that page of the
Sure.
value.
Sure.
members
I'm going to
got.
send you both that,
Yep.
and you'll see my signature video, which also
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah,
What
Gab,
else?
don't you think that's a very valuable thing to be able to show? How much value her members got out of certain solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can show that, other Vistage groups, this is what they're doing, and at the end of the day, you can get, the issue is value. So once you see the value, it's easier to say, okay, it's not as painful to
Yeah.
take the money out of my pocket and to pay for the
You're
membership.
welcome to use it. I've given that away to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I don't use any
Great.
Vistage
Thank you.
brochures. This is better.
Yeah, this is very personal.
It does
Yeah.
sound better than a brochure.
Yeah.
Great.
And Norma,
What else?
how valuable have your members used the Vistage networks to connect with other people in their industry? Has that been a value
Some
to
of
some
them,
of your?
some of them, yes. I'm just a little careful about not overstating that because honestly, here in the US, I don't know about in Israel, there are some organizations that do the networking part better, like YPO. And, I've had one or two members leave over the years because they just want the networking, that's fine. We are not as strong as that. And YPO is not as strong that we are in going in the deep work, because they don't have leaders like myself leading the groups. The groups are self-led, and there's another reason. I mean, they don't do the one-to-ones. They have a lot of social activities and networking, and that's fine. I have, what I say to people who are enamored of IPO, join both. Go have a good time,
Yeah.
but there's nothing like the deep work that we do in Vistage.
Which I think you've just clarified. If somebody says, why should I join Vistage? I'm part of YPO. There is a big difference between the two.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. YPO doesn't do the one-on-ones like Vistage does, and also the facilitators there are not, professional chairs.
I
It's
think
every
they're
year,
self-led.
They choose one person to be the moderator, and then that person will usually do that for a year and a half, maybe two. But it's just one of the members, so it's not somebody who over time professionalizes himself or herself in doing this kind of facilitation. I used to work with YPO a few years back, so I kind of know their system pretty well, but I think that's kind of a weak point.
Yeah, I think they do great work, and I had a 15-year member who's still a big fan of Vistage. He managed to grow and sell his company and start another one because of his time in Vistage. And he's in YPO, and he tells me about when his kids were little, taking them to a night in the museum. And so we don't do things like that. But so he was in that, and he was in Vistage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
And Norma, the confidentiality that we find in Vistage, in Israel, I cannot imagine that someone would necessarily show an army buddy their profit and loss statement if they're having a problem, But within Vistage, the confidentiality allows them to do things that they wouldn't be able to do elsewhere. Am I correct?
Absolutely. it's something that has to be experienced, I think. If somebody doesn't trust that, we take it so seriously. And they can talk to the members and ask about that, but it's part of the agreement that you've signed that everything is confidential. But then to
Right.
see it in the group, it's the foundation of everything, and you can't, you can't believe the things that people reveal to each other in these
Right.
groups. It's unbelievable.
And do you have to remind them about confidentiality every now and then, or it's already clear once they sign the agreement?
Only if I see something happening that's not kosher, doesn't feel right, I will. But yeah, and each chair manages a little differently. That Vistage has a rule: you don't do business with people in the group. My members do some business with each other, and my rule is to tell me about it and tell me if you're coming onto a problem. And it was only a potential problem once in my 22 years. Somebody in computer services was about to do a computer services project. He was bidding on it with another member, and that made me really nervous because those projects can get so complicated with overruns and so on.
Sure.
And so they talked with me about it, and I put a lot of questions in front of them, and they wound up not doing it together.
Mm-hmm.
So I do what makes sense to me.
Yeah. And I, as a speaker over 18 years, Gev, have respected that confidentiality because I hear certain things. Everything stays in the room. That's just a given, and that's part of the benefit of Vistage. People can feel safe. Yeah, Gev, do you have any other questions for Norma? I think her thoughts today have been very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I just have one question about the one-on-ones that you do with the members. Are there any situations where the topics that come up on the one-on-ones are not the same ones that will eventually come up in the group? I mean, do people speak to you about specific issues that don't feel so comfortable?
Well, absolutely. And there are other reasons too to keep some conversations in the one-to-ones. There are some people that really do not change easily, and you can't bring the same issue to the group 17 times. It's just it's going to wear the group out. They're going to get tired of that. So if somebody has already brought it a couple times to the group, I'll tell them, look, let's just work on that in the one-to-one, because there's usually something inside the person that is not shifting. And if anybody can get to the bottom of it, I can. I just know how to do that. I can feel what's going on, and I ask penetrating questions, and they let me do it. So that's another example where it would stay in the one-to-one. And some of the personal issues they'll tell me more about in the one-to-ones, and I'll tell them in the group, just summarize that in a couple minutes.
Right.
But there are exceptions when I'll encourage the person to bring something up. They're considering a big shift in the business, and it's going to affect their personal life. And
any other questions you get for Norma? She's been wonderful with us today.
Yeah, no, I don't have any other questions, but this has been very valuable. So I just wanted to say thank you. It's really priceless.
Well, thanks, Yagev. And I think that what you're doing is going to be a wonderful journey. And if you wanted to call me sometime, I'd be happy to talk with you. And I just think it's an opportunity to start fresh and learn from all of us and do it even better.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate the offer. And I would certainly use it. Thanks.
That's okay with you, Norma.
You're
I'll share
welcome.
your email address with the other candidates who are not able to join us today.
Sure.
We really thank you. Yagev, I've known Norma for all my time in Vistage, 18 years. She's always been such a great supporter, and I appreciate her immensely. Always with a good attitude, always with a good word. Norma, I greatly appreciate you.
Thank you. I enjoyed this, Yagev.
Me
good
too.
luck.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Yagev. The next meeting will be in 3 weeks from today. We'll have the recording of this. And Norma, we appreciate you sending the information.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Norma. Thank
Bye-bye.
you,
Thank you,
Okay.
Buzz. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Norma.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.